Part 1. Opposing Worlds. The autumn wind carried the scent of snow from the high peaks as Samuel rode into Goldstrike, his monthly circuit bringing him back to the roughest mining town in Colorado Territory. The main street churned with mud and horse droppings, lined with hastily constructed buildings that housed everything from legitimate businesses to confidence schemes that preyed on desperate prospectors. Samuel dismounted outside Murphy's general store, where he would collect mail and assess the community's needs before setting up his canvas church. The familiar sounds of the mining camp echoed around him. Hammers on rock, shouted arguments, and the constant din from the saloons that never seemed to close. "Preacher's back," called Tom Murphy from his store doorway. "Just in time, too. Things have gotten considerably rougher since you left." "How so?" Samuel asked, securing his horse and gathering his worn saddlebags. "New bunch of failed prospectors came in from the played-out claims up north," Murphy explained. "Desperate men make dangerous neighbors, and some of the business owners are taking advantage of the situation." Samuel nodded grimly, understanding the pattern he'd seen in too many frontier towns. "Anyone in particular I should know about?" "Well, Rose Mackenzie at the Golden Rose has been having trouble with Sheriff Crenshaw and his deputies," Murphy said with obvious concern. "They're claiming her establishment needs additional oversight and demanding weekly payments for protection." Samuel knew the Golden Rose by reputation, cleaner and more honestly run than its competitors, though still a saloon and gambling hall. He'd avoided the establishment during previous visits, focusing his ministry on the church tent and private homes where his presence wouldn't cause scandal. "Mrs. Mackenzie is a widow with a young daughter," Murphy continued. "She's never caused trouble for anyone, but Crenshaw seems determined to shut her down or bleed her dry with fees." That evening, Samuel erected his church tent in the clearing that served as the town's unofficial meeting ground. As he arranged the wooden benches and portable altar, he noticed lamplight spilling from the Golden Rose across the street, along with the sounds of conversation and occasional laughter that seemed more civilized than the raucous noise from other establishments. He was organizing his medical supplies when a woman's voice cut through the evening air with unmistakable authority. "Gentlemen, you've had enough for tonight," the voice said firmly. "Murphy can give you directions to the boarding house, and I suggest you take advantage of his hospitality." Samuel looked up to see a woman with auburn hair pinned in a practical updo, wearing a dark dress that suggested both prosperity and practicality. She stood in the doorway of the Golden Rose, calmly facing three miners who clearly outweighed her, but seemed reluctant to challenge her authority. "We ain't ready to leave yet, Mrs. Mackenzie," one of the men protested, swaying slightly. "Still got money to spend. And you'll be welcome to spend it tomorrow when you're sober enough to make reasonable decisions," Rose replied evenly. "Tonight you need food and rest more than you need cards or whiskey." Samuel found himself drawn to the confrontation, recognizing both the potential for violence and the woman's skill in diffusing it without escalation. When one of the miners took a step toward Rose with obvious hostility, Samuel crossed the street. "Good evening," he said calmly, his presence immediately changing the dynamic of the confrontation. "I'm Samuel Carter, and I believe Mrs. Mackenzie is offering sound advice about rest and proper meals." The miners' aggression evaporated in the face of clerical authority, and they grudgingly accepted Rose's suggestion about the boarding house. After they left, Rose turned to study Samuel with intelligent hazel eyes that seemed to assess both his character and his motives. "You must be the circuit preacher Murphy mentioned," she said, extending her hand with businesslike directness. "Rose Mackenzie, I appreciate the assistance, though I generally handle such situations without clerical intervention." "I'm certain you do," Samuel replied, accepting her handshake and noting the calloused strength that spoke of hard work. "I was impressed by your approach, firm but not confrontational." "Confrontation is bad for business," Rose said with dry humor. "Drunk miners spend money foolishly, but angry drunk miners break furniture and frighten away paying customers." Samuel felt his eyebrows rise at her pragmatic assessment. "You speak of your establishment as a business enterprise." Because that's exactly what it is, Rose replied, her tone becoming slightly defensive. I provide entertainment, meals, and honest gaming in a town where such things are often corrupted by greed and violence. I employ 3 women, buy supplies from local merchants, and contribute to this community's economic stability. Yet you profit from men's weaknesses, Samuel observed, immediately regretting his judgmental tone when Rose's expression hardened. Reverend Carter, I profit from providing services that men desire in an environment where they're treated fairly and respectfully, she replied coolly. If you consider that morally inferior to the confidence schemes, claim jumping, and outright theft that characterize much of this town's economy, then perhaps your monthly visits haven't taught you much about the realities of frontier life. Samuel felt heat rise in his cheeks at her accurate assessment of his assumptions. I apologize, Mrs. Mackenzie. You're right that I spoke without understanding your situation. Rose's expression softened slightly. Reverend, I don't expect approval from a man of your calling, but I do expect the same courtesy I show others, judgment based on actions rather than assumptions. As Samuel walked back to his tent, he found himself thinking about Rose's words and the dignity with which she'd handled both the drunk miners and his own moral superiority. He'd come to Goldstrike to minister to lost souls, but perhaps his own assumptions needed examining first. Part 2. Unexpected Common Ground. Over the following days, Samuel conducted his usual round of services, visits to injured miners, and mediation of disputes that had accumulated during his month-long absence. He couldn't help noticing that many of the town's problems seemed to center around corrupt officials who exploited the absence of established law. When young Billy Hendricks arrived at the church tent with a badly infected cut from mining equipment, Samuel discovered that Rose had already cleaned and bandaged the wound, likely saving the boy's hand from amputation. Mrs. Mackenzie knows more about treating injuries than most doctors, Billy explained as Samuel examined her work. She learned from her late husband, who used to doctor miners before he passed. She did excellent work, Samuel admitted, impressed by the skill evident in the treatment. The infection is minimal and the healing is progressing well. That evening, Samuel crossed the street to the Golden Rose, intending to thank Rose for her medical assistance. He found her tallying receipts behind the bar, while her daughter Emma, a bright-eyed 6-year-old, practiced writing letters on a slate at a nearby table. Reverend Carter, Rose said with surprise, looking up from her ledger. I wasn't expecting clerical visitors. I wanted to thank you for treating Billy Hendricks, Samuel said, removing his hat respectfully. Your medical knowledge likely saved his hand. My late husband taught me basic field medicine, Rose replied, gesturing for him to sit at the table where Emma was working. In a place like this, such knowledge gets used regularly. Samuel noticed that Emma was copying Bible verses in careful script, her young hand forming letters with impressive precision. You're teaching her to read and write? Education is the only inheritance I can guarantee her, Rose said with fierce determination. Whatever judgment society makes about my profession, Emma will have the knowledge to choose her own path. That's admirable, Samuel said sincerely, watching the child work with obvious pride in her mother's attention to her schooling. Mama helps lots of people, Emma said, looking up from her slate with the directness of childhood. She fixed Mr. Peterson's arm when it got broke, and she gives food to Mrs. Williams when her husband drinks up all their money. Samuel looked at Rose with new understanding. You provide charity alongside your business? I provide what's needed, Rose replied simply. This community has limited resources and unlimited problems. Everyone contributes what they can. Including hosting overflow congregations during bad weather? Samuel asked, remembering Murphy's suggestion about using the saloon for Sunday services when the tent couldn't accommodate everyone. If you'd find that appropriate, Rose said carefully. I understand that associating with my establishment might compromise your ministerial reputation. Samuel considered the offer, weighing theological concerns against practical needs. Mrs. Mackenzie, I've been wondering whether my reputation serves God or merely protects me from the complications of genuine ministry. What do you mean? I mean that Christ ministered to tax collectors and prostitutes, not because he approved of their professions, but because they needed spiritual guidance, Samuel explained. Perhaps avoiding your establishment says more about my fears than my faith. Rose studied him with growing interest. So you'd be willing to hold services here despite what people might say? I'd be honored to accept your hospitality, Samuel replied, though I admit I'm curious about what kind of congregation we might attract. The following Sunday, Samuel discovered that the Golden Rose could accommodate nearly twice as many people as his tent, and Rose's practical arrangements, coffee, simple meals, and seating for families with children, created an atmosphere more welcoming than his usual stark services. This feels more like community worship than formal church, observed Mrs. Peterson, whose husband's injured arm Rose had treated. People seem more comfortable sharing their concerns and hopes. Samuel realized that Rose's establishment provided something his tent services lacked, a sense of belonging and mutual support that extended beyond Sunday morning formalities. As he watched Rose quietly ensure that everyone had coffee and that children were settled comfortably, he understood that her contribution to community welfare went far beyond profitable business. After the service, as Rose helped him pack his portable organ, Samuel found himself reluctant to end their conversation. "Rose," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I owe you an apology for my initial assumptions about your character and your establishment. And I owe you thanks for treating Emma and me with respect rather than judgment," she replied. "Not many preachers would risk their reputations by associating with saloon keepers." "Perhaps that says more about the preachers than the saloon keepers," Samuel observed, surprised by his own words. Part 3. Growing Attraction. Samuel's monthly visits to Goldstrike began to feel like homecomings rather than ministerial duties. Each return brought anticipated conversations with Rose that had evolved from wary politeness to genuine intellectual intimacy. Their discussions ranged from practical theology to the moral complexities of frontier justice, with both finding their assumptions challenged and refined. "Do you ever question whether your calling requires you to remain unmarried?" Rose asked during one of their late evening conversations in December, as they sat by the fire in her private quarters while Emma slept upstairs. Samuel considered the question that had been troubling him increasingly. "I used to believe that complete dedication to ministry meant avoiding earthly attachments. Now I wonder whether that was conviction or fear." "Fear of what?" "Of being responsible for someone else's happiness," Samuel admitted. "Of having my judgment compromised by personal feelings. Of failing someone I love the way I failed so many during the war." Rose reached across the table to touch his hand gently. "Samuel, you've brought more genuine comfort to this community than any minister we've had. Your compassion comes from understanding suffering, not from avoiding it. And you," Samuel said, turning his hand to clasp hers, "have shown me that moral authority can come from serving others rather than maintaining perfect doctrine." Their growing attraction had not gone unnoticed by the community, and reactions were mixed. Many townspeople appreciated the partnership that had brought stability and genuine moral leadership to Goldstrike. Others, particularly Sheriff Crenshaw and his associates, saw their relationship as an opportunity to challenge both Rose's business legitimacy and Samuel's ministerial authority. "The good Reverend seems mighty comfortable with sinful enterprises these days," Crenshaw observed loudly during Samuel's January visit, his voice carrying clear threat beneath the supposed humor. "I'm comfortable serving a community that values integrity over appearances," Samuel replied evenly, refusing to be drawn into confrontation that would endanger Rose. "Appearances matter when you're supposed to be providing moral guidance," Deputy Mills added with obvious hostility. "Folks might wonder what kind of guidance comes from someone who spends his evenings in saloons. They might also wonder what kind of law enforcement takes bribes from criminal enterprises while harassing honest businesses," Rose said quietly, her words causing both men to stiffen with anger. Samuel realized that their relationship had made both of them targets for officials who preferred a lawless town they could exploit. The pressure was designed to force them apart by making their association costly to their respective positions in the community. "Rose," Samuel said after the confrontation, "I don't want my presence to jeopardize your business or Emma's safety." "And I don't want my profession to compromise your calling," Rose replied. "But Samuel, what we've built together, the way we've helped this community find some measure of decency and hope, that has to be worth something." "It's worth everything," Samuel said with sudden certainty. "The question is whether we're brave enough to defend it." "Together?" Rose asked, her voice carrying both hope and fear. "Together," Samuel confirmed, drawing her into his arms for their first kiss, tender and reverent and full of the promise of partnership that transcended their individual callings. Part 4. Crisis of Faith. The attack on Rose's livelihood came in March, when Sheriff Crenshaw arrived with a court order claiming the Golden Rose violated territorial licensing requirements and must be closed pending investigation of alleged illegal activities. "What illegal activities?" Rose demanded, reading the document with growing alarm. "Gambling without proper territorial approval, serving liquor without appropriate taxation, and operating a house of ill repute," Crenshaw replied with obvious satisfaction. "Those charges are completely false," Rose said firmly. "My gaming is honest, my liquor taxes are current, and this establishment has never housed prostitution." "Well, that'll be for the territorial judge to determine," Crenshaw said. "Meanwhile, you've got 24 hours to close down and vacate the premises." Samuel arrived to find Rose packing her essential belongings with the desperate efficiency of someone facing the loss of everything she'd worked to build. Emma sat quietly at the kitchen table, her young face showing the confusion and fear of a child whose security was crumbling. "This is about us," Samuel said immediately, understanding the true motivation behind the legal harassment. "I know," Rose replied, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "Crenshaw wants to destroy my business to prove that associating with you brings consequences." "Then I'll leave," Samuel said without hesitation. "I'll request transfer to a different circuit and—" "No," Rose interrupted firmly. "Samuel, if we give in to this kind of corruption, what happens to the next person who tries to live honestly in this town? What happens to Emma's future in a place where criminals control the law?" Samuel realized she was right, but he also understood the stakes they faced. "Rose, fighting this could cost you everything. Crenshaw has the territorial authorities backing his authority. And we have something more powerful," Rose said with growing determination. "We have a community that's learned to value integrity over fear." The next morning, Samuel stood before the largest congregation Goldstrike had ever assembled. Miners, merchants, families, and even some of the women from other saloons who respected Rose's fairness and protection. "Brothers and sisters," Samuel began, his voice carrying the authority of genuine conviction. "We face a choice between justice and expediency, between protecting what's right and submitting to what's profitable for corrupt officials." He spoke about Rose's contributions to the community, her medical care, her fair business practices, her protection of vulnerable women, and her commitment to her daughter's education despite social judgments about her profession. "Mrs. Mackenzie has shown us that moral character comes from actions, not appearances," Samuel declared. "She has fed the hungry, healed the injured, and provided honest entertainment in a place where such things are rare. If we allow corrupt officials to destroy her livelihood through false charges, we become complicit in the very lawlessness we claim to oppose." The response was immediate and decisive. Tom Murphy announced that the Merchant Association would provide legal representation. The miners' collective agreed to boycott any business that supported Crenshaw's actions. Even competing saloon owners, recognizing that Rose's persecution threatened all independent businesses, offered financial assistance for her legal defense. "This is what community looks like," Rose said wonderingly as neighbors she'd served offered their support in return. "People choosing to protect each other instead of protecting themselves." "This is what love looks like too," Samuel replied, taking her hand in front of the assembled crowd. People choosing to stand together despite the risks. Part 5. Redemption and New Beginnings. The territorial investigation revealed extensive corruption in Goldstrike's law enforcement, with Sheriff Crenshaw and his deputies facing charges for extortion, bribery, and falsifying legal documents. Rose's business was fully exonerated, but more importantly, the community had discovered its own strength in standing against injustice. "I've been thinking about something," Samuel said as they walked together through Rose's small garden behind the saloon, where early spring flowers were beginning to bloom despite the lingering mountain cold. "What's that?" Rose asked, pausing to check the herbs she used for both cooking and medical treatments. "About modifying my circuit to spend more time in Goldstrike," Samuel explained. "This community has grown enough to support a permanent minister, and I've grown tired of feeling like a visitor in the place that's become home." Rose turned to face him with surprise and hope. "You'd give up circuit preaching?" "I'd trade it for something better," Samuel said, taking her hands gently. "For the chance to build something lasting with you, Rose. A partnership that serves both our callings without requiring either of us to sacrifice what makes us who we are." "What would that look like practically?" Rose asked, her business sense automatically considering the details of such a significant change. "We could transform the Golden Rose gradually," Samuel suggested. "Keep the restaurant and boarding house aspects while reducing the gambling and adding meeting rooms for community gatherings. I could establish a permanent church while you continue providing the practical leadership this town needs." "And Emma?" Rose asked, always considering her daughter's welfare first. "Emma would have both a stable home and parents who respect each other's contributions to the community," Samuel replied. "She'd see that love doesn't require anyone to become someone different, just someone better." 6 months later, the Golden Rose had evolved into the community center Samuel had envisioned, with Rose managing the business aspects, while Samuel provided counseling and mediation services. Their engagement was announced at the church social, with wedding plans for the following autumn that would give them time to establish their new partnership fully. "Do you ever regret leaving the circuit?" Rose asked one evening as they planned the expansion that would include proper schoolrooms for Emma and the other children. "Never," Samuel replied honestly. "I thought ministry meant serving everyone equally, but I've learned that loving someone deeply actually increases your capacity to serve others, not diminishes it." "And I've learned that accepting love doesn't make you weak," Rose said, leaning against his shoulder as they watched Emma practice reading aloud to a group of younger children. "It makes you stronger because you're not facing everything alone anymore." Their relationship had proven that redemption comes not from rejecting complexity, but from embracing it with wisdom and courage. In a rough frontier town where most relationships were based on convenience or desperation, they had built something rare, a partnership founded on mutual respect, shared values, and the daily choice to see the best in each other despite the judgments of a world that preferred simple categories to complicated truths.